I'm going to show you how to do this cake start to finish, starting off with the bow. I'm going to show you how to make this bow, which is really big in 3D bow, but not just this one, but any kind of bow that you might want to make on a cake. Also, how to make the flowers, the letters, how to cover a cake in fondant, how to make all the musical notes. So let's get started. So we are going to make the bow at first, so I just want you to roll out some black fondant. And what we're going to do for this bow, I want it to be nice and pointy, so I'm going to cut out the shape of a house, and this is making the one side of the bow. You want to place that house shape on a piece of parchment, roll out another piece of black fondant, place the parchment paper on top of the fondant, and I'm using my knife, and I'm just going to trace the shape onto my other piece of black fondant. Once it's traced, you can vaguely see it in the video, but you really just want to cut out the other shape of the house. That way you have two identical sides of your bow. If you don't want a pointy bow, you just want a rectangular shape. Now, just using some paper towel that's rolled up, I'm going to stuff that in the bow. I'm going to fold each side in half, putting paper towel in between both, and then you want to smush it together. I'm just going to use some purple fondant and wrap that around the center of the bow because that's going to be the color for my cake. Now I just rolled out some black fondant. I'm just using some musical note cutters that I bought, which I'll put all the link to any of the forms and molds that I'm using in the description below. But I'm really just cutting out the musical notes that I'm going to be using on the top of my cake. You could also cut these out by hand if you wanted or pipe them, but I decided to get these cutters because musical notes are pretty generic. You can use them for lots of different cakes. To make the flower, I'm going to use my large flower cutter on some black fondant, and you just want to cut that out, and I'm just going to put it in a forming cup, dusting it first. And as I put it in the forming cup, I'm just going to fold over the edges. I'm going to use some gray fondant for my smaller flower, and I will assemble those two together, but you're going to have to let all these decorations dry for a couple of days ahead of time to make sure they're properly set. I'm just using this mold for the center. I'm going to use a little bit of purple fondant and just put it in a small mold, and that's what it's going to look like when it's done. You can just stick that in the middle of your flower. And now I'm going to make the letters. So this is actually a clay mold that I'm using, but it works really, really well for fondant, and it's really pretty because it puts these almost little flowers on each individual letter when they pop out. And I'm just going to make all the letters for my cake with it. And you're just smushing the fondant in it and then popping it out. The silicone molds work really, really well for fondant. And now I'm just going to trim off the top halves of, not the top halves, but the top of the two cakes to make sure they're really nice and flat. And I'm just using some white buttercream icing, and I'm just going to fill my cake and then put my other cake on top of that. And now I'm just creating a crumb coat. A crumb coat is just a very thin coat of icing. You don't need a lot of icing because we're just going to put fondant right over top of it, and you don't want it to be bubbly. And I'm just going to color my fondant purple. So this might take a little bit of time in kneading, but you really just want to knead the color till it's all the way through thoroughly. And now we're just going to roll out our fondant. So usually what I do is I take my rolling pin and I roll my fondant around the rolling pin loosely, and then I can roll it over the cake really nicely. I'm using a different kind of fondant than I normally use, and I had some issues with it. I found it really, really sticky, so it was almost kind of squishing together and ripping, which isn't a desirable thing. But so I had to actually re-roll out my fondant, and I'm going to try a different tactic for putting it on my cake than I normally do. Just kind of throwing it, but it seemed to work. So you're going to have to try out your own tactics to see if it's a little bit stickier fondant. Let me know what you use, if you roll it out or if you just kind of throw it on the cake. I'd like to hear about what you guys actually do to see the different kinds of tactics and techniques that you use to cover a cake in fondant. So I'm just going to peel my mat very carefully off my cake, trying not to rip my fondant. And then I'm just going to trim off the excess. You really want to get that heavy excess off the cake. Just really give it a rough trim because it can actually cause the corners to rip. And now I'm just going to pull the fondant out on the corner and then push it in with my hand, and that will make it nice and smooth all the way around. And then now you can actually do a nice trim. So to create the black border, which is almost like a ribbon that's going to go around the base of my cake, I'm just going to roll out some black fondant in a very long line. And then I'm just going to cut it into a really nice straight long triangle. You're going to have to make 2 or 3 of these to cover the whole cake in fondant. If you're doing a large cake, there's no way you'll be able to do it all in one. Just make sure the seam is at the back of the cake when you do it. And now I'm just using some black buttercream icing, and I'm just piping some lines on to the top of my cake, and my musical notes will sit right on top of that. And you can just use the actual icing as it's wet to stick the musical notes onto your cake. Just place them really randomly. And what I like to do is take my letters and I put them on the cake first and rearrange them like how I like. And then I take a little bit of water and I stick them on with water because they are going to be hard and they are going to need water to stick to the cake. But make sure you have them in place where you want them before you stick them down. I find that's always a lot more helpful because sometimes I change my mind about where I like to put them on the cake. And then the bow, I just stuck with a little bit of water and just stuck that to the top. And that's it. We're all done. I really hope you guys enjoyed this video. It's really fun, really easy. It shows you different kinds of tools and techniques and different stuff to do the cake. And as I said, I will be putting all of the different tools, molds, forms in the description below if you'd like to buy them for yourself. I really hope you enjoyed this video, guys. Let me know what you think. And if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Thanks.